My name is Jessica Collins, and I'm the Executive Director of the Public Health Institute of Western Mass. And I am joined here today by an incredible team of folks to share what we've learned and what is being recommended with regard to this health impact assessment with regard to housing and CORIs. And I'd like to introduce Samantha Hamilton, Lamont Scott, Richard Johnson, Kathleen Zegda, and we are very lucky to have a couple of interpreters with us today throughout the next 90 minutes. I would also like to welcome folks that have been part of our advisory board, and I was wondering if in the chat, if you have been on the advisory board with us, if you wouldn't mind putting your name and that. As well as everyone else, if you'd like to introduce yourselves in the chat, we welcome that. For the next 90 minutes, we do have a presentation with stories and information about the health impact assessment, how the assessment was done, and the findings and recommendations will be shared. And then at the end, we have some presentations with regard to resources. So at this point, I again would like to thank everyone for joining us, and I will hand it over to Samantha Hamilton, who will be our MC for the rest of our time together.
Thank you, Jessica, and welcome everyone. Thank you for being here today to hear our report on how a CORI impacts housing for older adults. I want to start off by setting the tone for who this work impacts by sharing a video that reflects the voices and the urgency of the issue. So I want to introduce Van Thomas, who is a resident of Springfield, who has experienced CORI barriers and wants to share his lived experience on why this issue is important to him.
My name is Van Thomas. I actually live here in Springfield, but I was born and raised here, but I left and lived in Boston for a while, and I came back to Springfield in 2009.
What does it mean to live with a CORI as a Black man today?
In my experience, what it meant, I was working at Mass General Hospital, and I had a very good job. And like I said, I had an altercation with one of the employees where he actually told someone I had a gun. So when I came into security, they said, well, you can't come back to work here because you lied on your application. We show that you have a CORI. And I was like, what? I don't have a CORI. And they said, yeah, you do. You lied on the application. So when I went and checked, it was a CORI, but it was someone else's social security number, but they linked it to me. So I lost that job. And that was an excellent job. I lost that job, and then I kind of like struggled to find new work. I ended up doing like short order cooks, but I have like management experience. I was like one of the food service managers at Mass General. So that was a big deterrent in my life. That just, that was just so different. It's like I was getting paid like $18 an hour back then. Could you imagine how much I'd be making now? So I'd be rich, I'd be wealthy.
Did you officially have a CORI, or was it tied to someone else?
No, it was actually tied to me. But what they were telling me, it was the wrong social security number. They said I lied about my social security number. But when I got to the office, where was I? The courthouse in Boston, we looked at it, and I could see the charges were actually mine, but they were like real old. This was like 2006, and the events in my life happened in 1974. You know what I mean? And they were holding that against me. So that was pretty difficult. And actually, it was shocking. It's like, how can you hold something against me? That's like 20 years ago at the time. It's like.
Did having a CORI impact your housing?
Well, I was actually living on subsidized housing on Beacon Hill. I actually lost that apartment, and I was paying like $400 a month for rent, on Beacon Hill, and that's one of the richest neighborhoods in the world. But
if the CORI process was revised or not taken into account for housing, what would that have meant for you?
Well, it would have been easier to have apartments. I would have been able to stay in my apartment. Actually, it was such a detriment in my life that me and my son had to separate. I had to leave him in Boston. He was only like 18 and come back to Springfield. So I didn't want him to go to a homeless shelter with me, you know what I mean? So I was actually homeless, sleeping in my truck, for about 6-7 months. And then I decided to come home to my mother. My mother lives here, so she has a house, so I actually moved into her house, which makes it easy. I haven't actually had to apply for housing, even though I put in applications, but they never called me back because my mother was the landlord, so thank God for that.
If you had the opportunity to speak to the policymakers about the impacts of a CORI, what would you say to them to convince them to do something different?
What would I say to them? Well, definitely needs to be changed. Like I said, it's like that CORI actually was like 20 years in my mind. It's like that shouldn't even be on my record. It was so old. If I would actually tell them to review the CORI, how they come about using it for various different things. I mean, like I said, I haven't had to go to housing, but I have applications in, and now you're making me wonder if that's why they are not, answering my applications, I mean, though it's inactive, I mean, I have a copy of the record, but still, it's like, I don't know, what they're actually seeing when they put me in for a CORI. It's supposed to be non-existent, but I don't know if that's true. So I would actually tell them to work further. Like you said, I learned how to navigate this thing on my own. But when Richard came, he asked me if I would be willing to lend my voice because I was an activist in Boston for other things. So yeah.
How did you go about the process of navigating it on your own?
What did I do? I don't know how I actually got there, but I think I just walked into the courthouse and said, look, I got a CORI. Tell me about it. Where is it? And they showed it to me. I said, I need to have it removed. And they did all the documentation. They gave me a list of what the charges were. And it wasn't until I went to, I want to say it was, I can't even remember what it was. I want to say Mass Health, but it's not Mass Health. It's the agency that helps you. They actually helped me go back to college, So that's about it. It's like, and for me, it's like I have to be confronting them myself, in order to tell them what I feel, And like I said, I have a copy of the CORI, and I can show them all I had to go through. I mean, it still took like 4 years after, for it to be removed, but it's supposedly removed now, so I'm pretty content.
How did it make you feel when the CORI had impacted you after a large period of time?
Number one, I was like, I don't know, I want to say I was insane, but I wasn't insane. But, it was just devastating. I mean, like I said, I had a really good job. I mean, Mass General just pays you top flight money. So, I was devastated when I walked out of security and they said, well, you have a CORI. It's like, well, I got to find out what you're talking about. And you know what I mean? And it turns out that one of my brothers actually used my Social Security number. And I mean, I had some little incidents with the police, and I had a little record, but that was like 1974. And here we're talking about 2006, That's like a long time. So yeah, I was down. I was down in the dumps. I was, I didn't know which way to go, but, I figured it out.
Thank you. So that is the voice of Van sharing his lived experience with having a CORI. I'm going to pass it to Kathleen, who is working in support of showcasing our slides, to kick us off to explain what a health impact assessment is, as well as what the process is.
Thank you, Samantha. So let me just pull up the slides. So to help folks have an understanding of what is health impact assessment and the report that was done for this. I'll share that HIA, or Health Impact Assessment, is a tool that's used to assess the potential impact of a proposed policy, plan, or program or project on health. And it's used when the policy itself is not necessarily directly impacting health, and it helps to highlight how the policy or any of these other things here actually then through implementation would then impact health and lifts up impacts on health. The HIA also then provides recommendations based on the potential impacts to mitigate potential impacts, or also to promote more positive impacts as well, and also recommendations on monitoring. HIA has 6 steps as part of its process. It includes screening. So in that step, it's a potential policy or proposal, and really determining if having an HIA would add value and would help to understand the impacts. Scoping is the next step that would be conducted to evaluate the health impacts, and identifying also the methods for analysis for the health impact assessment. The next step is the assessment itself. And in this step, all the data is pulled together, so systematically evaluated different types of data, and it helps to identify what are the current status of the health conditions and other determinant health areas that are being examined for this. And then the next step is then to determine, okay, if this policy was put into place, what do we anticipate the potential health impacts would look like? Based on what is found, then recommendations are made, which would be strategies to mitigate or manage any potential adverse health impacts or promote positive benefits to health. And then this information is then shared out in a number of ways, because health impact assessment is really about action and informing policies that are being implemented so that they do have a positive health benefit. And so that can include an HIA report, but also a variety of different mechanisms to communicate findings. And then also, especially important, the recommendations. And then the other piece of this is then evaluation and monitoring to help to understand both the process of the HIA that's conducted, but then the impacts of the implementation of the policy, and also the HIA itself on decision-making and impacts on health. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Samantha.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Kathleen. So our HIA research question was, what would be the health and equity impacts of housing providers changing their practice or policies around the use of a criminal background check for older adults? And I want to share that this question came out of our housing and transportation assessment that was done in 2019. And in that assessment process, we went to community organizations like the Deborah Hunt Center, where we heard from an older adult male that shared in the housing assessment process that they had a barrier to accessing housing due to their CORI. And we call those conversations and those revelations ground truth to the real equity and social issues impacting communities, and sometimes communities of color. And that question stayed with us in concern, because we wanted to know if that older adult male was the only person experiencing this barrier. And from that, this question was formed. We wanted to be sure that we were listening to community to understand, is this happening for other folks with a CORI, and what are the implications to their lived experience as well as their health with this. Next slide. So here are some of the takeaways that we've learned that we want to kind of ground folks with as we go into presenting our recommendations and findings. There's not enough housing in Hampden County to meet the demand. So we want to recognize that this is an existing barrier for all housing authorities to address, and folks looking for housing, that there is a limited inventory and a higher demand. The other takeaway that I want to share is that consideration for criminal history has systemically been inserted in a housing decision. This is a process in which this is a consideration, and this has been a standard practice. Next takeaways, policies for mass incarceration has led to many more people with records who are disproportionately Black and Latino or Latinos. So this is an equity reflection. We have not found any evidence that people with a criminal background are more likely than other residents of public housing to commit crimes. Also, not being able to access affordable housing, as housing can affect mental and physical health, and it impacts the individual and the community. So another reflective takeaway from our findings when working with communities, we found that older adults with a criminal record are at a higher risk for incarceration, a higher risk of homelessness, and housing instability. On the contrasting side, older adults are at the lower risk for committing crime and getting arrested. So there's a disproportionate, there's a relationship in which older adults are the ones experiencing housing instability. And on the opposite context of their criminal history, they're less likely to be offenders, where folks 85 and older are 8% likely to recidivize, versus all adults under the age at 28%. And where regarding homelessness and instability, older adults age 44 and up are 45% more likely to experience homelessness, where at a younger age of 30 to 44, they're 31%, and under 30 are at 27%. Next slide. And we want to also re-echo the takeaway that was shared before on the context of how significant this information is, that we found no evidence that having a criminal record impacts your success as a tenant. And this is something we should be mindful of as we figure out how to address these issues. Other professional takeaways from other sectors we want to reflect is that local housing authorities, LHAs, want to help people with CORIs get help, and as a setup for people that are low income and have a balance the need of other potential residents. To reframe that, local housing authority are trying to work with folks with CORIs, while they're also working with other communities that have barriers like low income and other groups. Local housing authorities also are able and will consider mitigating circumstances. However, many people do not apply because they think they will be denied due to their CORI. People are denied for public housing for many reasons beyond the 2 offenses that the federal government mandates denial for, and we will share more about that later. And partnerships with service providers are valuable and evidence-based, and are well-received strategies. And not all people with CORIs need the service providers, but they do need the housing needs. And lastly, being able to live with a family member after release from jail or prison is one of the highest need for folks coming back in the community. And data on proportions of people denied housing do not exist. It's not available at this time. So we're wanting to understand that more. So I'm going to pass it to our partners that are working with us in this work, Richard Johnson and Lamont, to kind of share the methods that was used, but also the importance of this work as community partners at the table. And they did a lot with us in helping us understand the community groups and also to interview and reflect the voices of the community. Richard, Lamont.
Good morning, folks. Welcome and thank you for joining us. I want to also thank Samantha and everyone down at her shop for allowing us to participate in this work and giving voice to community residents throughout the process. I want to say that we committed to the community that we would come back and speak to them with regards to our findings, and this is an effort to fulfill that responsibility and obligation. My name again is Richard Johnson, and I'm employed by New North Citizens Council. However, I've worked for the beloved community and for those residents of the community for in excess of 20 years. And so one of the things that I want to lift up is that, you know, this issue around aging and housing and access to equitable consideration for these placements in housing are very real. I mean, there's often opportunities for folks to point out older individuals who are not gainfully employed and not stably housed and look at them as less than and or persons who are less desirable and not contributing to society or to the community. And I just want to go on record as saying that that is not always the case. You know, there are barriers that are systemic and institutionalized that really prohibit their full participation. And we engaged in a process by which we recruited and talked to people about their experiences with housing. We captured their information through video and through recording, as well as a written format, and gave them an opportunity to anecdotally share their experience with us. And we tried to represent that as forthrightly as possible throughout the process of the study. And one of the things that I want to really point out is that, you know, their encounter and understanding of their rights as it applies to housing, it varied along the spectrum. And so some of the interactions that they may have had with housing authorities and or others who had access to providing them housing, it also varied. Their experiences go from the unimaginable to the very polished discrimination that takes place. I want to make room for my partner in this, MOCHA and Lamont Smith, or I should say Lamont, to talk to us a little bit about his experience. I think that my experience and our team's experience was really well-rounded and grounded in giving folks the space to be who they are and speak their truth. And I think that we were very successful in doing that. Lamont?
Lamont, you might be on.
Yes, go ahead. Thank you, Richard. My name is Lamont Scott. I'm the MOCHA project director. And also, I've experienced some of these issues myself. But without further ado, I'd like to speak about the work that we've done pertaining to focusing on the individuals in our community that have had difficulty getting housing. And I'd like to also give the respect with my team, Brother Mike Edwards. He's a MOCHA mentor, and also Brother Al Hubert, who is one of our lead facilitators for MOCHA, who's been with MOCHA for over the past 8 years. Without these gentlemen understanding and working with me and also being through the same issues of having barriers with housing, including myself, it was overwhelming and appreciated that we had a chance to go out to our community and focus on talking to folks and doing surveys, and also recording information to bring back to our team about some of the difficulties pertaining to housing and some of the barriers that that's been shared and given to us for us to put on this presentation. And this also gives us an opportunity to reach other people within our community, especially folks that are over 45, 50 years old, that are still having barriers trying to get into housing, which we know that our CORIs and criminal history sometimes follows us to the day that we may die. And that we want to kind of have a different experience with that, and also trying to live a better life by having some type of housing where we're living comfortably and being able to get back into our community. Some of the key information that I think we really took, because some of these interviews took over 2 hours to do. And we really put it in a point to where we really needed folks to open up and share their life events. And then what we did find out that there are plenty of people over the age of 50 that are still in shelters, still have no housing, are afraid to go to housing or to where there's public housing, or also even through landlords to try to get housing because of their CORIs. And we think that's a big holdback. By working with some of the key housing authorities in Springfield, and also other agencies such as Wayfinders, we're trying to break through and also show folks that there will be an opportunity for them to get into housing, and also do not give up, because there may be an outlet. And part of why we're putting this presentation on, part of why we've done a lot of the interviews and surveys, is to hear people's stories so we can present this information back to our housing authorities, back to our community, and reach out to folks so they can have an opportunity to have a better quality of life as they continue to age, but also have a nice and beautiful place to live at without any restrictions around them. And also giving them another opportunity. We know folks that have CORIs, sometimes people look down on us, and it's not all bad people that have CORIs. It's just people that made mistakes in their lives. People want to regain and start to focus on their life. And if we're not given that opportunity, it seems like we're always stuck in a hole or in a rut. I think Richard had mentioned quite a bit of some of the information that that really makes us reach out to folks. And one of the other things that I'd like to mention, through Bay State, and also I'm also doing through Health New England, I am, in the last 4 years, I've been going up to Ludlow Correctional Facility, AISS in Springfield, and also Mill Street. I just wanted to say that we are talking to a lot of folks that's coming out of incarceration, also to give them that avenue to know if they're having a problem with issues with housing, that there's help out there. We can also hopefully lead them in a direction where they can get past this barrier. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Lamont. And thank you, Richard. We're going to dive into some of the background and equity issues related to the history of CORIs and housing. So I'm going to pass it to Jessica to kind of just ground us in the context of what has happened to get us where we are and what is possible.
Yes, thanks, Samantha. And I was remiss in saying at the beginning that we do have an extensive report for people that want to see the nitty-gritty details about this health impact assessment on our website. We'll put the chat, and also a shorter, smaller infographic for people also. So, and we will share these slides and the recorded presentation. So the consideration of criminal history has systematically been inserted into housing decisions. Part of the health impact assessment went back to have a historic perspective on how did we get here? And as with everything, it seems like in life, things are there are, kind of negative consequences, positive consequences. And when they went back and looked at certain policies in the 20th century, quite frankly, there was a lot of, policies put in place to Lamont's point that have punished people moving forward. In the earlier 2000s, there was some effort from a national legislative perspective to curtail and mitigate some of those policies that had been put in place before. And so in the report, you will find that there are timeframes of policies put in place reacting to what negative consequences were happening, and then other policies such as Fair Housing Act in 2015 to mitigate, as I said. So the next slide is a little repetitive of what Samantha said, but again, we just want to call out because some of the findings and recommendations from this health impact assessment are policy recommendations. And so we wanted to just highlight again that policies have severe implications often on people's lives over long periods of time and need to be looked at and then addressed. And so, as Sam said, mass incarceration has led to disproportionate representation of Black and Latina populations who are homeless or unstably housed. And some national research showed that people who have been incarcerated are estimated to be up to 11 times more likely to experience homelessness than people who have not been incarcerated. And then when we looked at local data from the city of Springfield's housing department and the Springfield Hampden County continuum of care, we see that in our county, Black and Latina people have higher rates of homelessness than their proportion in the general population. So as we tease out the policies, we can see how they are disproportionately affecting certain people, certain communities, and our recommendations try to address those. So I'll hand it back to you, Samantha.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jessica. So now we're going to speak to, the social determinants of health factors that associate with our research. And we're going to speak specifically to access to affordable housing, the involvement in the criminal legal system, and safety. So I will speak to the affordable housing. I'll ask Brother Richard to speak to the other slide regarding involvement in the criminal legal system, and then Lamont to speak to safety. So why is it important? So we want to frame that most people in our survey, 84%, said that the barriers of their record to accessing affordable housing has caused an increase in stress in their lives. And more than half reported an increase in depression and anxiety. Older people who are homeless tend to exhibit health characteristics that are more consistent with a non-homeless person approximately 10 years older than them. So access to housing has strong health indicators on how we cope with stress and deal with depression and anxiety. The next slide speaks to the involvement in the criminal legal system. And I'll pass it to Richard to talk to the importance of this issue and the slide.
Thank you, Samantha. So I think that, the slide kind of speaks for itself in terms of the data that we've been able to receive from the Hampden County Sheriff's Department. But I want to kind of go a little deeper into the anecdotal description of what takes place. And when we think about individuals who are aging, oftentimes what's happened is they've had an experience, whether it has been in their youth or whether it has been in their mid-20s, that followed them perpetually. If an individual is incarcerated and has a probation or a parole, it's like a double whammy whereby you have to be tethered to an institution that is the criminal justice system that holds you to a standard of having stable housing, where you can't have stable housing if people don't rent to you. When you're released, they require that you have a stable address to go to. And in many instances, folks need to go back to their families. And if their families happen to be receiving assistance where they live, they're unable to go legitimately and stay with them for any significant amount of time. And when we think about the older population, many of them have young people in their lives who are children or grandchildren. And so part of what happens is the reflection or the collateral impact that their homelessness or their lack of access to adequate housing has on their loved one is also quantifiable in terms of some of the things that they have to experience when traveling through society and trying to care for a loved one. The criminal justice system doesn't have a re-entry program that addresses specific access to quality housing in ways that make a difference here in the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth always lift up the fact that they don't have adequate housing for all of its citizens, and the housing stock is constantly shrinking. So when it comes to someone with a CORI, someone who is aging, someone who might have comorbidities with health issues, diabetes, and other things, trying to stabilize housing and get support from a system that has penalized them, not only with a sentence that was issued by a judge, 3 to 5, for an example. When they've completed that sentence carries on even after they've satisfied what was required of them by the justice system. So it's really unfair, it's untenable, and it has residual impacts throughout our community, you know, because of a person's inability to be housed. And we challenge some of the rationale that takes place in some of the places that that provide opportunities for housing, because some of their decisions are so arbitrary when it comes to denying, reviewing an individual's application. It's just untenable for many folks. And many folks don't take from that experience lessons to go follow up with legal aid, to request a hearing in person, to request an appeal. You know, I mean, it's so frustrating and so demoralizing to have doors shut in your face as a result of having had an encounter with the criminal justice system, that a lot of people are at a very significant loss when it looks at, you know, what do I do next? So here at the Deborah Hunt Center and in other spaces here in the city, we try to be that what do you do next, and connect people to folks who might be able to help them, like legal aid, like the folks at Wayfinders who have programs that can work with folks around these issues. And the other thing that I want to lift up that's critically important is that oftentimes when we think about folks who have previously been incarcerated who are aging, we think in terms of males. Well, guess what? The revelation is that females get locked up and are incarcerated and are paroled and on probation as well. And so some of what they experience, it's compounded, multiplied times over in terms of having to go through demoralizing experiences to try and find shelter for them and their children if they have children. So I want to leave it there, but I want to make sure that folks understand that when we think about aging and we think about housing, it isn't just the male who most folks think, well, okay, he's a man, he can fend for himself. It's also women, and it's also children. So thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for that reflection. And I'll pass it to Lamont to talk to the importance about safety regarding this issue.
Yes, I think the safety issue is when people don't have housing, they're pretty much, and I think Richard did elaborate on quite a bit of it, is like people going to go out, and if you don't have a house and no stability, the safety of it is you're going to be in the streets, you're going to be homeless, and we know shelters are not the most positive place for you to be, with, even in the cold, because there's so many issues going on inside. But also, another safety part of this stuff that I want to also say, the mental and physical health of not having a home or being homeless creates a bigger issue moving forward, not only with stabilization with family, but also trying to get back into society. We know that a lot of folks that come out that doesn't have housing will probably end up involved in more criminal activity because of no stabilization. And it's a risk factor. We want to understand that people, they get into housing, and we want to keep people that are living in housing, we want them to be safe. So we want people to come in and have some type of, we want the housing authorities, and hopefully we can help make a decision and move forward with this in the numerous ways on more of a political basis through the State House, where all this can change, where there is some type of programs that people that come out where they don't have to feel like there's a big issue of them trying to get into housing. There should be programs. And I think the safety part is to educate folks that are coming out so that they know that there's an opportunity and what they have to do moving forward to have clear and good stability in trying to get housing moving forward. As older adults, and also Richard elaborated on, it's the health conditions. A lot of times folks 55 and older have a lot of issues, not only physically, but also mentally. And we believe that we need to have a lot of outlets for people to understand their situation, understand that they need stability, and also tutoring, mentoring, and understanding so how they can get back into society and get affordable housing and have opportunity to live a better quality of life moving forward. And there's so many safety issues out there to elaborate on, but we want to make sure that you look at a lot of these videos, a lot of information, and what have probably hurt you, or what have this system done to you for our safety, for you to have housing and to continue a better quality of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Lamont. All right, so we're going to transition now to talk to you about the policies and practices, how practices could help, and current uses of the practices that are in place regarding older adults, regarding housing and CORIs. So our next slide, I would bring back up Richard, just to reflect on our advisory committee. This group consists of diverse partners, and Richard being one of them, from the Deborah Hunt Center, New North Citizen Council, and Lamont as well. But I give space for folks to acknowledge our planning partner teams, our committee members, and just the diversity as well.
So I think, and I think you were calling on me, Sam. So I think one of the things I want to say to folks is that the individuals that you see on this slide represent so many sectors of our community, and the problem or the challenges faced by housing individuals with CORI were so, they were very generous with their time. And we had significant, robust conversations back and forth with regard to some of the challenges that they face as providers and some of the barriers that folks face as folks who want to access housing. And I want to say and thank folks out loud publicly for their willingness to hear some of the challenges, even though the conversation sometimes wasn't as pleasant as it could have been with regard to some of the issues that people deal with. But from the provider perspective, folks were willing to hear that and the honesty and the truth within the conversations that took place. And I think that part of what has to happen in order for us to move policy that will be favorable to housing and to folks seeking housing is that we're able to have these dialogues and be able to be honest and be able to represent what the total toll of not having access to housing is, and not being or giving short shift to the mental health and the stability of families when we think about that.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. So let's just move on to the recommendations. So the 6 recommendations that came out of the report, and these are the ones that we focused on, not to say that there weren't others, but these are the ones the advisory committee felt most pressing and important to assess and understand, and also recommend going forward. The first is establish a formal partnership with housing and service providers. I will elaborate on each of these going forward, so I'll just give overall summary. Use only federal exclusion criteria in housing admission decision. And the exclusion criteria that's referred to is pertaining to the use of methamphetamines in a housing institution and related to restrictions related to criminal sexual predatory history. So those are the higher exclusions. Allow applicants to submit evidence of mitigating circumstance for denial, and create explicit criteria for denial that is available publicly. And that would empower folks to know upfront what the denial criteria are. We want to know and share, and for this to be available, the shared data about denials when folks are denied, that information is being collected, and the possibility of permitting family members of housing people with CORIs except for those federal exclusion guidelines criteria. So the next slide will reflect on expanding partnerships. And as mentioned before, in some of the high key takeaways, there's evidence that shows when housing authorities and reentry behavioral health and also homeless services collaborate, they'll have a bigger impact on the health and the outcome of the person reentering the community. So these types of partnerships are well accepted by housing providers, residents, and service providers. The two fact finding is that majority of people in supportive housing successfully retain the housing, which is important to know. And people in subsidized housing people in supportive housing after prison were 40% less likely to be rearrested and 61% less likely to be reincarcerated than a control group a year after release. And to some extent, some of these partnerships already exist and could be expanded on. This is a voice from our Chicopee Housing Authority staff who shares, "We get women directly from the Chicopee Housing Jail. They have a great working relationship with Gandara's counselors. And in a year or two, when women can get themselves back into the work world, be productive in terms of income, and have gone through counseling, they apply. Will they get into Serenity Housing for public housing, and currently they get permanent housing, and they can get permanent housing." So this is a reflection that, and this is the point of Richard's reflection, is that women as well as men face barriers, but with support systems, transitional support system, they are better equipped to maintain permanent housing. Policy recommendation number 2, only consider mitigating HUD criteria. As mentioned before the higher restrictions, but all the local housing authorities will examine considering criminal legal systems involvement beyond the mandated mitigating exclusions. So we're just asking for consideration of just those exclusions. Local housing authorities go beyond looking at convictions and consider arrest. So what if that was not a factor? And changing practices to only denying people outright for the mandatory HUD criteria would decrease the number of people denied due to their criminal record. Recommendation number 3 is allowing for mitigating circumstances. And mitigating circumstances is the opportunity for folks to give a reason for why the incident happened, and a explanation of how they've kind of moved from it and are no longer would be likely to commit those behaviors going forward. So all agree that no need for mitigating circumstances at the pre-application process. And there are like 3 examples of 3 local housing authorities that incorporate consideration for mitigating circumstances beyond denial and show promise. And that's all this information, again, as Jessica mentioned, is in the full report, and with more detail and content on the local housing authorities that are doing this. And although applicants can request a hearing, there are many barriers to doing so. So from our survey, 31 people who were denied housing due to the CORI, 10 of those folks chose to appeal, and 3 had the denial overturned. So there is some promise, but folks need to feel empowered to activate that promise of appealing denials. And the voice of someone who faced this barrier says they asked for an exorbitant amount of information, which is tedious at best in regards to trying to get housing assistance applications or asking for information that as a person struggling or in the midst of an addiction, it's hard to obtain. So I just give up. So that's the voice of someone in our survey that reflected their experience. Policy recommendation number 4, make denial criteria public available. And in summary, this is screening criteria is mostly available, but not very accessible for 3 out of our 4 local housing authority that we worked with. And having that information presently available will help us understand the scope of the issue. And when an applicant applies, they don't really know about CORIs unless they look at the COAP online and the state restrictions. We do give them a CORI form once they get the application screening, which explains what it's all about. So putting the denial criteria out for folks to understand will help them process whether they should apply and what the denial criteria might look like. So next slide. Here's another voice saying, but many people don't bother applying. I never went to housing to to fill out an application for housing. In the back of my mind, I know that my criminal record would be my downfall. I think I would be denied, so I never went the route to get an apartment, which I really need. So there's this feeling or premise of not knowing and feeling that in their not knowing they would be rejected even if they tried. So we wanted to reflect that. And 5, publicly available denial data. We're asking for denials due to criminal background request for hearings and overturns be available. No local housing authorities was able to supply denials, meaning a running list of how many folks were denied over time and what that looked like. We get, when we can measure what's happening, we have then now the power and the capacity to hold folks accountable, to be transparent, and to and possibly advocate for something different if we're seeing a trend in denials. Next slide. And the number 6, allowing people to live with family members. I think this is the most heartfelt policy recommendation, if possible. And a majority of people return from incarceration rely on families for housing. And so this is it's an urgent need to support folks if they have that resource. But because of the rules about criminal records, people with very few other options would sometimes live with families in public or subsidized housing without notifying the local housing authority. And that does have an impact. This can lead to evictions of people who have a criminal record, and also or of people who do not have a criminal record, my correction. So for the folks, family members that do allow a family member that have a criminal record into their homes, and local authorities are aware of this, they then have to evict the tenant not with a non-criminal history. And local housing authority report that they experience many problematic situations with drug and crime because people are coming to live with family members against the rules, and that's when they really find out it's happening. So those are some of the barriers. So moving forward, the other recommendations, and again, all of this is in our HIA report, is related to funding to continue the partnerships with housing and service providers. We need the resources to do so, to pilot programs like gradual reentry programs, to set aside housing for people exiting jail and prison. We need the resources to do so. To change local housing authority practices, one of the consideration could be folks that are 50 and up are automatically considered have mitigation if no crime in the last 2 years. Designating a staff person or navigator to help with the application process. Expand training or services or review of how to read CORIs and federal criteria. Put absolute disqualification crimes and information on the about appeals on the front of the application for folks to know ahead of time what is possible and what the barriers they might face depending on their criminal history. And for the criminal legal systems, again, it's an opportunity to expand funding criteria to allow community-based reentry programs, improving reentry services to ensure people reentering have true housing plans. So making sure they have a plan in place to move forward. And so those are the recommendations. They're rich information. And again, I would refer to our either infographic that summarizes some of this content and or our full report that goes deeper into what these strategies could look like. Going forward, we want to thank our funding partners that supported us in doing this work. Massachusetts Community Health and Healthy Aging Fund, who funded the HIA report. Tufts Health Plan Foundation, who is supporting us going forward with the Healthy Aging Fund to present our findings back out to community and take this information going forward. I want to thank also the partners, the HIA partners that helped us look through the content, the data, and the report, our team for doing such a great job. I'm now going to, again, reflect another voice of a resident that kind of shared their lived experience and what it means to have a CORI. So I'm going to share again so we can hear from Anthony Kelly and his lived experience with the CORI.
My name is Anthony Kelly. I'm from Springfield, Mass, born and raised.
What does it mean to live with a CORI as an older Black man today?
Well, for me and in my experience living with a CORI is that I lived in Las Vegas. I worked in Vegas. I'm a certified sous chef. Went to school for culinary arts. But it was some casino and resort places I couldn't get hired because of my CORI. And it was certain places and residential places that I couldn't live because of my CORI.
How has living with a CORI affected your family, employment, and housing?
Well, I could tell you this story about, God bless my mother, she's not here now, but living with her, trying to live with her. My mother lived in Seattle, Washington, but the complex place that she lived in, they asked for CORI checks, and my CORI came up from Massachusetts. And the reason why I wanted to live and stay with my mother is because my mother was sick, dying of cancer, and I wanted to be there for my mother and, help her and with her sickness. And they wouldn't let me be there because of my CORI. What I did was I stayed anyways, I'm not gonna lie, because I wanted to be with my mother for the last days being here. So I stayed, and did what I had to do, but just, have to sneak in and out and don't let, people see me go in and out and things like that, where if it's like late and things like that, they you know, nosy and things like that, and they talk a lot. And thank God nothing happened whereas I got in trouble or anything, but you know, for checking my CORIs for other jobs and things, you know, them checking up on my CORI and seeing the record that I had and things like that, I couldn't get the jobs, and that messed me up big time because they wanted to hire me for my experience, and because I had experience in the job field, you know, that, you know, they couldn't hire me because of my CORI.
If the CORI process was revised and was not part of the housing decision, what would that have meant for you?
It would mean that I would have had the job, that I could have been there with my mother. It meant that a lot of certain jobs, because I like to work with kids and, you know, coach sports and you know, try to work at housings where kids, like delinquent kids, live and all that. I can work there and be around them and give them my experience, strength, and hope. But having a CORI, you couldn't do things like that.
If you had the opportunity to speak with policymakers about the impact of the CORI, what would you say to them?
I would tell them that they should give people with the CORI background check. When they do give a background check, you know, see what the nature of the crime was, because if, you know, you only have like breaking an entry or something like that, that shouldn't stop you from being there for your mother or working with other kids or things like that. So look into people's CORI and see the nature of the crime and things like that and give them a chance.
Thank you. So that is the voice of Anthony Kelly sharing his lived experience of what it means to live with a CORI. And I want to reflect the context that, you know, not everyone, once someone has a CORI, their experience with it differs, where Van talks about separation from his son, living homeless for 3 to 7 months, relocating to Springfield, being with his mother. Anthony speaks of a time in his mother's life where any of us would want to be there for a loved one, but the barrier of supporting them was based on his criminal history, and he could not legally be there, but his heart said, I have to be there on behalf. And as Richard reflected on, these voices that we share are of African-American males, but there are plenty of women in the criminal legal system that are facing these barriers when they do re-enter. I want to move us forward to kind of just talk now about the resources and opportunities that are out there to support folks that are looking for housing, and also folks that are experiencing the criminal legal system and have a CORI and they're looking to address those. We have a relationship with Wayfinders, who's our partner in this project, but was also here to present their information. I'm gonna see if Kathleen can pull up the slide for us. But I'm going to speak to Wayfinders as our partner, John Fisher, is unable to today due to a friend and family loss. And he was comfortable in us just sharing the resources of Wayfinders for folks to understand what's available in our community, but also he's also expressed that he's willing to speak with anyone directly about the services going forward. So what does Wayfinders have to offer? So the Wayfinder program is very robust. I'm just going to highlight the quick details of it. They have housing education services, housing support services, home ownership and financial education programs, which I personally took advantage of with the first-time home buyer programs offered by Wayfinders, rental assistance and economic mobility, affordable housing programs, affordable housing management, community build and engagement programs, and more. So we're just going to go through these buckets real quickly. For the fair housing programs, they provide fair housing and housing right counseling, workshops, education, and outreach to cooperate with the Mass Fair Housing Center and other agency providers. They say we can help people, help refer you and help you to talk to others, parts of the agencies. They have housing support centers, as they shared, 187 housing of housable, affordable homelessness by utilizing the RAFT program, and 10,000 or over calls and walk-in requests for assistance in this program. So this is centered in Springfield, Holyoke, and Northampton. Wayfinder service the Regional Housing Consumer Education Center for Hampden and Hampshire County. So those are the recommendations. Next slide. So who is eligible for rental assistance for families for the RAFT program? So these services are renters who are homeless or moving into subsidized or private housing, or are at risk for becoming homeless. A household income cannot be greater than 30% of the probably the low income guidelines, and the housing income between 35 to 50% who are facing housing crisis due to the consideration of income or increased expenses. So also housing incomes between 50 to 60% who are at risk of injury or harm due to domestic violence in their current housing situation. Subsidized units are eligible for 6 months of arrears, and not specific to COVID at this time. And households must have both an eligible housing crisis and be income eligible in order to qualify for the RAFT program. So that's a program for folks. Who is eligible for emergency rental assistance program? Applicants who may already receive RAFT support or benefits are eligible. Rentees only, COVID-19 impact folks. Renters must be able to provide a statement attesting to unemployment, decreased income, or increased expenses due to COVID. Income up to 18% of the average medium income, and benefits cap for renters and landlords may receive up to 12 months of assistance with past due rent, plus up to 3 months of future rent. And rentees must also receive up to $150 for overdue utilities accrued in March of 2020. And use limited, so John is here. So I don't know if John wants to chime in. And John, I was just trying to pinch hit for you, knowing that you had an emergency, and wanted to just honor presenting the resource for Wayfinders. But I am excited to see that you're here for you to continue to share more about the services of Wayfinders.
Oh, great. Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So it sounded like you had gone through I think some of the key interests here are the assistance programs. You mentioned ERAP, so you've also mentioned RAFT as well. ERAP is, again, right now just for renters, and there is a maximum of $10,000 on both ERAP and RAFT. I think we can probably move on if you want to. Okay, the other thing that we have is, and this is a very specific thing, something called an accountable care organization, and it's elsewhere as well, but we locally have a program for anyone who's connected with Mercy, Holyoke Hospital, Holyoke Health Center, and has Mass Health. There's assistance that can be given for anyone who's experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness, with things like housing search, trying to resolve problems. This is where someone could really possibly step in and help somebody who is running into problems because, for example, of a CORI history or whatever it might be, that this is assistance in kind of getting through some of the barriers. I think the next one, you probably want to move on to that one too, is just the home ownership program we have, which particularly does first-time home buyer courses. It also works on credit counseling with people. And if anyone has a mortgage, work on foreclosure assistance and so forth, there's some special loans that could be available for helping people with the cost of deletting, helping people with the cost of making whatever modifications they may need to make for their home in order to make it handicapped accessible and so forth. And again, really just coming back to it, it's sometimes maybe it's home ownership isn't for everyone. And that's one of the things to sort of work out. But if this is sometimes a route of being able to get out of the constant hassling around being a landlord, finding a place to live and so forth. It's a major step, but it's worth considering. And next slide, because there is a new program which is just starting up. It's a state program. It theoretically began enrolling people, 7 days ago. And there is a link to where you register for it on the bottom. This is for people who are homeowners. In the past, RAF and IRMA used to, ERAP used to try to serve as homeowners, but now this is for homeowners. And the nice thing about it is the income eligibility level is 150% of area median income. And I believe Samantha was talking about it with some of the earlier programs where it's 50 or 80%. With this one, it's 150. And by the way, the area median income is higher than most people think. And this is, again, to help people who have had problems with mortgages and so forth. You have to register online through a website. However, if you need assistance, we're just now starting it, but we're going to be providing application assistance and support for people to sort of walk them through the process if necessary. And next slide. And again, without going into too many of the details, there are a number of programs where we provide, there's emergency housing, interim term housing is provided for people. And again, you just basically probably should talk to someone to see how you would fit into those programs. I know we have a very brief time to go through these. And I think next slide. Same thing is that there are some programs that tend to work with people who have housing subsidies and housing support, and to also help with job readiness, resume building, things of that nature. And next slide. And of course, there's the rental assistance program, not just Section 8, but also the Massachusetts Rental Voucher Program, and also some economic mobility programs. And this is something that people often hear there's a huge waiting list and they don't think to apply, whether through us or through some of the other our colleagues in the local housing authority, certainly Springfield Housing Authority, some of the other housing authorities. But basically, this is the, if you will, the statewide application portal for Section 8. And just, it takes a long time to apply, from the time you apply to the time your eligibility comes up, because the demand is so much greater than the supply. But I think it's so important to make sure that not only you've applied, but if at any point you move, there's an address change, that you let people know, because I've seen people who essentially have lost their place in line, if you will, lost their position on the waiting list because they moved and they forgot to tell them. So people could update their application. There's family self-sufficiency programs. There's a program called SNOMAS, which is works with helping people who presently have Section 8s to move into desirable neighborhoods with greater opportunity. The VASH program for the veterans as well. I think another slide. And without going into all of what they are, but there are a series of number of properties that we manage as well. And hopefully it's always worthwhile getting on the waiting list of these, just as it is to apply and get on the waiting list for some of the other available properties. I think one further slide beyond that, community building and engagement, which is focused primarily in Springfield and Holyoke, works with really dealing with people around local issues, things that helping to support the people who live in these communities and work with them and help to bring resources to them. That's not everything we do, but hopefully it gives you an idea of what some of the things are. I believe one of the earlier slides had the phone number, or the general phone number to call, which is 413-233-1500. And also, again, if you want some help in terms of trying to make some sense out of some of these other things, feel free to call me, or one of my associates will get back to you. My number is 413-233-1609. I left it in the chat earlier because I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to get back in time for this. But that's basically us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, John, and thank you for sharing and supporting folks with understanding what is available when it comes to housing. I'm going to pass it to Alyssa Golden. She is a staff attorney at Community Legal Aid to speak to the resources for folks that have either their CORI record or dealing with the criminal legal system. So thank you, Alyssa, for being here, and thank you for helping us understand what is available for folks in the community.
Great, thank you. So yes, my name is Alyssa Golden. I'm a staff attorney at Community Legal Aid. I work out of our Northampton office, but the work that I do is all around CORI and substance use disorder, mostly sort of in the areas of housing and then criminal record sealing and expungement. I do this work in Franklin, Hampshire, and Hampden counties. We have another attorney who does this work in Berkshire and another in Worcester. So our whole service area is sort of covered around providing legal assistance with these issues. So I'm going to focus mainly on housing and particularly on admissions. What often happens is that people are on wait lists for affordable housing for years, right? And then they get close to the top of a waiting list and they receive a denial notice or a notice of ineligibility because of their criminal record. Now, the process tends to be fairly problematic in multiple ways. So one of those ways is that the notices that people receive, unfortunately, often fail to make it clear what the person is being denied because of, right? So sometimes the denial will say because of your criminal record. Sometimes it will say because past behavior, if repeated, would threaten the rights of other residents, tenants, right? Sometimes it's sort of that vague. Sometimes, when the notice says that it's about a criminal record, often it doesn't specify what on somebody's record is at issue, right? So really what's supposed to happen is people are supposed to receive actual notice about what on their record is at issue. And then people also have the right to receive the document that the housing provider is using in making that decision. So people should be, where a housing provider uses the CORI system, they should be providing applicants with the CORI that they accessed, right? And unfortunately, it often does not happen. So when I get involved, this is sort of a common way that things may play out. So somebody applies for legal assistance through me, they've received a denial or an eligibility letter. The first thing that we want to do is make sure that the person submits a written request for an appeal as soon as possible. Usually those letters say you have 10 days, you have 20 days, depending on the program. All that means is you just have to write it down and submit it to the housing provider. It can just say, I was denied, I want to appeal. There's no sort of special process that a person should have to use. They just need to put it in writing. If somebody's referred to me and I'm going to be assisting them and they have not put it in writing yet, often I will do it on their behalf. I'll reach out to the housing provider and say, hey, this person wants to appeal their denial. I'll be sending along a release so I can access their admissions file. At that point, we need to know what the housing provider, what information they have, and what are the sources for that information. Because sometimes the information that a housing provider is relying on is accurate, and sometimes it's not, right? The CORI system is an imperfect system. These are things that people are entering into a system, and sometimes it's not correct. So it's really, really important for people to get, to receive the documents that are being relied upon so that they can, know whether or not they need to dispute the accuracy of the information. Now, with that aside, and that does happen, the main piece is really looking at how do we put criminal records issues sort of in the context of the rest of a person's life, right? So we're talking about moments in time when a housing provider is using this piece of paper that has these snippets of a person's life, and they're saying you are not eligible for this housing assistance because of these particular things. Then part of my job, or anyone who is assisting someone or anyone who is appealing a denial on their own, what we're doing is looking at what context do we need to provide and what rights does this person have? So I usually say about 85% of people that I represent in housing denials are in recovery. And where that is the case, we actually, I look at this through the lens of the protections available for people with disabilities. So under fair housing laws, if a person is in recovery with a substance use disorder and they are not actively using substances, then they are protected under the sort of disability discrimination protections that are in place. And so what I help people do is figure out whether it's appropriate to make what's called a reasonable accommodation request, which is it's a request to kind of make a change to a policy or a procedure in order for a person with a disability to still be able to fully access, a housing program. And so in this case, it's overlook this person's criminal record because their criminal record is directly related to a disability, right? So that's often a part of my work. And then another, fair housing discrimination side of this is where housing providers have, these very broad categories of criminal records denials, right? Blanket bans on all felony convictions, or long periods where people are ineligible for housing for just a huge range of offenses. Often that can be a race discrimination issue, because what we know is that the criminal court system has a massive disproportionate impact on people of color. And so where housing providers have, large sort of bans on applicants with criminal records, then likely those policies will have a disproportionate impact on applicants of color. Now, HUD has made that clear. They made it clear in guidance in 2015 and 2016 that this can be what's called a disparate impact issue, right? Which just means disproportionate. There's a disproportionate impact on people of color, right? And so HUD has made that clear that in federally funded housing, there need to be individualized assessments, right? There cannot be blanket bans. So that's another piece of how I approach this work. And then a large part of it is what we call mitigation, right? It's the rest of the context. So what was going on at the time that somebody was involved in the criminal court system? What's happening now? What information is it important to share? What information is a person comfortable sharing? And then I'm working with people to sort of figure out what information we'll be putting forward, if we'll be making a reasonable accommodation request. And then that's how we figure out how we're going to approach the appeal. A couple of things that I'll say more generally. Absolutely, people should be applying, and absolutely people should be appealing their denials. Okay. It's the only, and I know it was said here, but I can't stress enough, the only mandatory categories of denial are if somebody is subject to the lifetime sex offender registry under state law, right? And that's not about the level. It's not if you're a level 2 or a level 3. There are significant offenses that will require somebody to register for life. It's those offenses, right? It's not all sex offenses. Are they harder oftentimes to overcome in the denial process? Absolutely, right? There's a huge stigma attached, but that doesn't mean it's not worth appealing. It doesn't mean it's not worth fighting, right? And then the only other mandatory ban is where someone has a conviction for making, right, the production and manufacturing of methamphetamines on federally funded property. Right? Those are the only two. Everything else, a person has the right to appeal, and I absolutely encourage people to appeal. I also encourage people to reach out to me for assistance with these appeals, because unfortunately, what we know is that where people have access to legal assistance with any type of legal issue, likely they're going to be more likely to have success in the process. Is that how it should be? It absolutely is not how it should be. Is that the reality? It is the reality. So, I would absolutely encourage people to apply for assistance if they face a denial or an ineligibility, and absolutely appeal. The other piece of the work that I do, and I will share my email address and my direct line in the chat, and everyone feel free to reach out to me. The other large part of what I do is I represent people in the process of sealing and expunging their criminal records. So unfortunately, the other thing that often happens, and I feel like we've even heard it here today, is that people are already eligible to have their records sealed, but they don't find out, about sort of what's on their record, or it's not on their radar that it is still visible on their record until they're facing a denial of some kind, right? And once that flag has been raised, that's it, right? A housing provider can't unknow something. And so whenever someone is eligible to seal their CORI, they should absolutely do it, right? The general rule is that you can seal misdemeanors after 3 years, misdemeanor convictions, and after 7 years for felony convictions. Now, every conviction has to be eligible to be sealed, time eligible, or none of it can be sealed, right? So the clock is, if I had a misdemeanor conviction that was 4 years old, well, yeah, that conviction would be time eligible. But if then I picked up a felony conviction, then we got to wait out that 7-year clock too. And so part of what I do is I have people sign documents so that I can access their CORI, and then I can make an assessment and help people understand whether they are eligible to seal now, and if they're not eligible to seal now, when they will be eligible. Okay. So the difference between sealing and expungement, because I think this is easy, it's easy to confuse it. Sealing is the option that is much more accessible to people. Expungement is actually fairly rare. Sealing is really, it's a very severe reduction in the number of entities that will see those records, right? Very, very few. There are certain, like the courts will see it, DCF will see it, and there are certain other agencies and licensure boards. But generally speaking, housing providers are not seeing sealed records. The only thing that housing providers have access to is convictions that have not been sealed and pending criminal cases. That's all they see when they run CORI. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, not all housing providers use the official CORI system, and they use private companies like CoreLogic or any number of other private background and credit check companies. And those are not, they're not error proof. So those companies are sort of pulling in information from any source that they can find. They're not necessarily accurate, and they're not necessarily only providing information that really that housing provider has a right to. And the same with employers. Employers don't have a very high, or most employers don't have a very high level of CORI access. Some employers, like employers who are hiring people to work with populations that are deemed vulnerable, children, adults with disabilities, things like that, they have a higher level of access. But the takeaway really is seal whenever possible, right? And then expungement is the actual destruction of these records. And it's rare. I will say the time I see it the most is where people have convictions that have been vacated because of the drug lab scandals, if folks are familiar with that. That's a common one. And then things that are no longer crimes, right? So simple marijuana possession and certain other things that are now legalized or decriminalized, those as well. I'm putting my email address and my direct line in the chat. People are welcome to reach out to me to talk about, the need for, the personal need for legal assistance, how to make referrals to me, any and all of it. Feel free to reach out. Again, we cover Berkshire, Hampden, Hampshire, Franklin, and Worcester counties. So keep it in mind.
Thank you, Alyssa.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this resources.
No problem.
And I want to close out by thanking everyone for presenting this content. It is a rich content. We had a lot to share. Our findings, our community partners, engagement, services and resources available to you regarding housing and legal aid supports. Again, I want us to reference that we do have a full report that folks were checking out while I'm on here. Thank you for doing so. That goes in more detail. And our goal going forward is to continue to share out our findings with other community groups and get an understanding of what the equity impacts are, what the systemic issues of this issue is, but also what is possible in policy and systems change within the housing authority system and the criminal justice system to support folks to have better livability as they age and folks that are aging with a CORI. I also want to thank the residents faces that I'm seeing on here that are connected to the community and the issue is personal to them, or they know of folks that are experiencing this barrier. This presentation will be is recorded and will be captured later on and will be translated in Spanish as well for folks that are not primarily English speakers. Thank you all again. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Kelly, behind the scenes. Thank you, Richard Lamont. And thank you for the Housing Authority partners and also our HIA team for pulling this together. Have a wonderful day. And thank you all again for being here.